Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and I'm joined once again with Jeff Berkowitz from Chicago with Public Affairs TV. And Jeff and I are going to be talking about both the national issues as well as some issues going on in Chicago. And Jeff, here and there, they're overlapping. But let's start with what happened as we tape this on Saturday, December 21. The Congress avoided a government shutdown right before Christmas, and we saw some interesting things here. Part of that was the influence of President Trump and the lack of influence of Joe Biden. But, Jeff, what are your insights from what you just heard over the last 24 hours and what went down?
Well, the important thing here, Terry, for people to know, this CR, continuing resolution, spending in general for the first few months of the new year through March 14 will continue at the same rate, roughly, as the spending before. The bad part about this, here's the big, everybody's wonderful, there's no shutdown. We don't generally have budgets. Maybe sometime during the year we'll have budgets. The important thing about that, especially for things like defense, there's no planning, there's no changes, there's no thoughtfulness. So it's not good news that we did this. It would be good news if they said, as in the past, we have 12 appropriation bills. They've passed the House, they're going to the Senate, they're being discussed in regular order. If we have to catch up with China, we're starting to do it. That's not happening.
That's not happening, and it hasn't happened for a long time. It hasn't happened under the Biden administration. Look, Congress has settled in, and I would say Chuck Schumer, who has led the Democrats in the Senate, doesn't want the regular order. He doesn't want to have 12 spending bills that collectively make up the U.S. Government budget. He wants to have continuing resolutions because that empowers him to put money into the budget. And in fact, it's not really a budget. If you have the House pass 12 spending bills, that the Senate then would have to pass those for it to become law, each one of them, and that puts limits on government spending. And one of the reasons we have this national debt exploding is because we haven't been having budgets passed under regular order with restrictions.
Right, and my understanding is, again, little news coverage of this, is that the House, under the Republican majority, I think has passed 6 appropriation bills, but they've gone to the Senate and Schumer hasn't taken them up. So it's useless. And nobody, look, we don't have leaders, okay? Hakeem Jeffries is not a leader. You know, you came on, he did a show at the end of this, no shutdown, and he said, you know, they didn't get this, what the Republicans wanted, because Trump wants to cut Medicare, and he's going to cut Medicare, and he's going to cut Social Security, and then he's going to jam through tax cuts. And that was put on the news, and then he walked away. Nothing. No media even asked any questions. They didn't try, and he didn't give them a chance. We can't have government continue with buffoons who say they're leaders making statements and not handle questions from the media, and we can get some truth going here. Because when people lie, they should be challenged.
They should be challenged, and they should be corrected by the media. You don't just sit there and nod your head when someone makes a blatantly false statement. And by the way, Jeff, we're talking about the spending that has not been controlled. A lot of the Republicans coming in, it's going to be different. But here's what's happened. Here's the result of not passing budgets is the federal national debt has exploded, and the debt payment is now over $1 trillion a year. And, you know, the upcoming American generation is really getting the short end of the stick because they're going to have to be saddled with this massive government debt unless we can get control of federal spending. And again, I want to bring up, what did we learn aside from just the government shutdown was avoided, is we learned is that Donald Trump is having an influence. The initial bill was like over 1,500 pages. The one that passed was slimmed down to about 115 pages. But we also learned that the Republicans, with the slimmest of majority in the House of Representatives, they lost some of their members, and they had to have Democratic votes to pass. So when we're talking about passing the Trump agenda, that's going to be in doubt now, because we don't know if the Republicans are going to be able to stick together when they only have a majority of 2 or 3 votes they're probably going to have to be compromising along the way with the Democrats.
Right, they have 220 representatives in the U.S. House, and yet they lost on these several votes. About 3 dozen of those 220 voted no. So Mike Johnson had to turn to the Democrats or he wasn't going to pass anything, and that wouldn't have been good. And these 3 dozen people made a statement by voting no, but by voting no, they gave the Democrats a lot of leverage because that's how you get things into the bill because you're negotiating and you're bargaining. And so it would have been nice if they made their statement in another way and gave less leverage to the Democrats and undercut the Speaker, Mike Johnson, who now they'll blame and possibly remove at the beginning of next year.
Yeah, I was going to say, you just said removed, and I was going to say, now it's a question of whether Mike Johnson can survive as the House Speaker, and will we then have a repeat of what we had 2 years ago when Speaker Kevin McCarthy of California it had to go 16 votes before the Republicans could settle on him as the Speaker.
Well, the other thing why that won't happen, Terry, is because there is a new president, and he's not waiting until January 20, and the country is not waiting until January 20, but effectively Donald Trump is the president of the United States. Effectively, we have not had a president. That's what came out in the Wall Street Journal this week, that we have not had a president for the last 4 years because they documented this, 50 references. There weren't many that were quoted, many were anonymous, but nobody doubts that there were 50 people in the Biden administration telling the Journal that from the beginning, Joe Biden has not been with it. He has bad days and good days, and that didn't start just when this was realized by the country watching Biden debate Trump. No, it started 4 years ago.
I'm glad
we have not had a president. We have not had a president. And now the president is Donald Trump because this president left.
Yeah, Trump is, as you say, de facto president. He's not sworn in yet, but he's already calling the shots, dealing with foreign government leaders. And I have often said over the last number of years that I can't wait until the books come out from those who worked in the White House under Biden saying how the administration was held together with duct tape and baling wire because they had a president that couldn't do the job. And now this Wall Street Journal article that you brought up, where they talked to 50 different sources, 50, and went through how even from the first year, Biden was not capable. And this is why what we would see with Biden when he had a press conference, they had to pre-select the reporters that would ask the questions. And he would say, who am I going to next? Oh, Joe Schmo. And Joe Schmo had to submit his question to the White House staff first so that then the staff could write a response for Biden to read. I mean, this man was a puppet president. And we contrast that, what we saw last week, Donald Trump stood at Mar-a-Lago taking reporters' questions for over an hour, unscripted, randomly picking reporters, like we would expect a president to do, and he could answer the questions off the top of his head without notes. So it's going to be a dramatic difference going forward. I think for all Americans, better that you have a president who is actually in control of his White House. Whether you like his policies or not is another issue. But it's going to be certainly different with the Republican Congress coming in the Senate. And again, let me just remind the people, here's the balance of power in the Senate we're going to have. So go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was saying that, and that point you made, you said, with the rocky start on this negotiation and the actions in the House of the Republicans not being together, well, I think they will be more together after January 20, because after then, Trump will formally be the president. He's going to start kicking some butt. He wasn't doing as much as perhaps he might have wanted to here in terms of the House. And the point you just made now by putting up that slide, people forgot, well, that Senate 53-47, although those folks were elected on November 5, they won't come into office until January 3. So this shutdown negotiation was negotiated with the old Senate, That was a majority under Chuck Schumer. There's going to be a new majority under John Thune, and it's going to be 53-47. They're still going to have to deal with cloture in many issues, so they still may have to get 60. So they're going to have some cooperating Democrats.
In the Senate, we're talking about cloture in the Senate.
But
And I think the Republicans are going to have in the House, we already talked about this, but unless whoever the speaker is going to be, let's say it's Mike Johnson, if he remains a speaker, he's going to have more control over his caucus in the House of Representatives if he wants to pass the Trump budget. He's going to have to get uniformity without any defections. That's going to be a tough order. Newt Gingrich said he didn't know how anyone could really manage to be speaker under such a slim majority as now Mike Johnson and the Republicans have.
Well, we're going to find out the kind of leadership that Donald Trump has, because I want to see leadership that reminds the country, who perhaps will remind representatives and senators in both the Democrat and Republican parties that there are important issues for this country to face. The country has enemies: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, real enemies. China's looking, we've talked about this before, Terry, you've talked about it, that, Xi of China has said he wants his military to be ready for war in 2027. We're a few days away from 2025. And clearly he's thinking of invading Taiwan. Is America going to be ready for that? Will they be able to handle that militarily? So what we're ticking.
Let me interject. The United States military, have done war games on that very issue. If China attacks Taiwan, and in the war game, America lost the war. So, I mean, this is a literally deadly serious issue. And I tell you what, as an American, I'd rather have a president like Donald Trump who can function and knows how to use power on behalf of America, is cognizant, than a diminished Joe Biden. By the way, there may even be some congressional hearings on this diminishment of Joe Biden and who, in fact, was calling the shots during his presidency, which was really an abrogation of the democratic process, that you had a diminished president incapable of making decisions, but somebody was making decisions. And we may hear more about that, certainly, I'm sure, as books are published after people leave the Biden administration. But we may also have some of those insiders called to testify in the future before the House of Representatives and the Government Oversight Committee.
Well, there's that, and there should be hearings, and maybe they should start very soon, like after January 3, because maybe the country is in danger for the next 17 days between January 3 and January 20, because they don't have a functioning president. And we do have an amendment to our Constitution, the 25th Amendment, which was passed recent times, and that amendment deals with a process where if the President of the United States is incapacitated, the Vice President doesn't say that he shall do it, but the Vice President has the authority under that amendment, under our current Constitution, to go to the Cabinet, get a majority of the Cabinet to agree with the Vice President, and the Vice President can make a declaration to the President that essentially that President is being removed, and the Vice President, the responsibilities are being transferred to the Vice President. The President can contest that, and this can play out. But maybe it needs to. Maybe it should have, and maybe it should get. 17 days without a president is a very dangerous situation.
Well, we've had 4 years without a president, I would say.
Well, we've been lucky that we've...
Do you know how many cabinet meetings Joe Biden has had? 4. Four. And you know, when he had the cabinet meetings, his staff had to write out statements for him to say. I mean, this man couldn't speak off the top of his head. He had to have a script. He had to have a teleprompter every time he spoke. And when he tried to speak off the cuff, we saw, these famous gaffes that he would make, and that people would comment on. And he refused to take a cognitive test. President Trump took one when he was in the Oval Office, but Joe Biden didn't.
maybe we need to remind people again, since the beginning of the year is starting and January 20 will soon be upon us. What are the major steps that we expect Donald Trump to take from day one? We expect we expect a lot of executive orders on illegal immigration and dealing with the 7 or 8 million, starting with starting with the most dangerous illegal immigrants in the country, dealing with perhaps the millions, into the millions of illegal immigrants that are a danger to this country in the interior of the country. So dealing with that. Can he do much of that by executive order? Must it be by legislation? Can he deal with the remaining effect of inflation caused by this massive spending that Democrats had for several years? Can he deal with deregulation and do something about the energy problem that's coming upon us, drill, baby, drill? Can he do that by executive order? Will
He can do a lot by executive order, but he wants to pass laws, ideally. He wants to pass the tax cuts of, renew the 2017 and add to it. So it'll be the tax cut of 2025. He wants to do that. It's a high priority. Some in the Republicans Party are arguing that that should be included in early on. Some are saying they should do 2 reconciliation bills, which I don't want to get into the nuts of what that is, but basically some are saying they should do 1 massive reconciliation bill, including is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Smith of Missouri, but others are saying it should be 2, and you should put off the spending bill for the second one. I think that would be a mistake. I think you want to put that in power as fast as you can, because that's going to influence the growth of the economy. When you get tax cuts, when you lower the tax on capital gains, when you have no tax on tips. So we'll have to see, by the way, are the Democrats going to stay together when Trump is trying to pass a tax bill that says no tax on tips, no tax on overtime? Because these are going to be good items for the working class. And we'll have to see, are Democrats going to say, no, I'm against that, I'm not going to vote for those tax cuts for the working people? I mean, these are some of the political wrangling that we can preface now that people can be looking for coming up.
But as you point out, usually you get 1 reconciliation bill. And the importance, folks, of a reconciliation bill is it allows you to pass things on a majority vote for both the House and the Senate, I believe. And so unlike things where we talked about the barrier of needing 60 votes in the Senate, because we didn't have a budget in 2024, the good thing about that for 2025 is the Congress gets, if they want, 2 reconciliation bills. And maybe, I understand your point, Terry, maybe you want to do it in 1 large bill, but the other response, the other view is maybe you want to do it in 2 separate bills so you can build some confidence that the Republicans can govern with the majority in the House and the Senate.
The argument against that, if I might, if you pass 1 big bill, I think, that's a lot of confidence if you just do 1, so you don't need to do 2 to get confidence. And number 2, we already saw, as we just saw this yesterday, the defections in the Republican Party. You want to have, while everyone's like, okay, we're the new Congress, we're all on board together, you want to try to get as much passed early on as you can in the House, because early on, before you start having these political divisions really split your caucus apart. For whatever reasons, so many of the Republicans want to affirm their independence, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the Democratic members follow the leader. They're voting in unison. The Republicans are not. So I would argue they ought to do 1 big bill, get the funding for the border, get the funding for the military, get the tax cuts spent. And once you get the funding for the border in law, yes, on day 1, Trump can do executive orders, but then the next president, whoever that is, could undo that, just as Joe Biden undid so many of Donald Trump's executive orders when he came in. So it's better to write laws than executive orders. The advantage of an executive order is you can do it immediately.
Well, the main thing is for the President of the United States to set out clearly the agenda, which he may want to do a big speech to the nation, because he may want to go over the heads of some of these Democrats in the House and the Senate and remind them he has a bully pulpit. And if the public is behind some of these important issues to deal with at the get-go on energy, on illegal immigration, on inflation, maybe some of these Democrats are going to start supporting some of these things, and you're going to need some of that. And maybe the Republicans are going to be more cohesive. So we'll see what kind of a leader Donald Trump is at the get-go. And just to remind this thing, the emphasis we've had for the last week or two, certainly the last few days, on the shutdown has been a gigantic waste of time. It might have been nice if they'd done at least a few things. You know, like Rand Paul mentioned, yes, mostly we've described what this CR, continuing resolution, does, but it injected $100 billion, not small change, into disaster relief. Rand Paul said, why not do 50 billion? Maybe that would be enough to deal with this. And if it wasn't, then you throw in the other 50 billion. And I realize we're dealing with trillions of dollars in government spending, maybe something like 6, maybe more. So maybe 100 billion doesn't sound that large, but when you do that kind of a pilot analysis, you learn from that, and maybe you start dealing with your trillions better.
No, it's a good idea. I mean, I don't trust 110 billion. I mean, really, dude, how careful did anyone add up what needed to be done that it came to 110 billion? I can guarantee you they're throwing darts. This is why they had a 1,500-page bill before. And when any of the Republicans talk about cutting back, those on the Democratic side of the aisle often act as if you're undoing the 10 Commandments, that every dollar the federal government spends is written in stone and is good spending. But Jeff, let me just bring this up. We used this before. Look, $1.3 billion sent to dead people and other vet groups in 2023. The Illinois Channel did video of a House hearing in which the Inspector General, to remind people, the Inspector General said that half of all the unemployment benefits under COVID were sent to foreign gangs. The amount of waste in government is massive, massive. You could probably cut, well, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy want to cut out $2 trillion, which is the amount of the deficit that we have. So we really have to get a handle on spending, as you and I have already talked about. They've not been passing budgets. They've been doing government on continuing resolutions. And as you have pointed out, and it's true in every department, but certainly in the military where you're trying to buy weapon systems, you can't plan ahead when you never know how much money you're going to get this year, much less 2 or 3 or 4 years ahead.
Well, again, every failure, every mess is a gigantic opportunity. So the mess that this country is in the way it's conducting its development of a budget, as we've talked about, is a gigantic opportunity for the Republican Party to say it can govern. It can introduce a methodical, thoughtful way to get at these problems, both domestic and foreign policy, and get the discussion going in the House and in the Senate. Remember, the U.S. Senate used to be called the greatest deliberative body in the world.
Used to be.
And now it's a joke. Used to be. Can it get back to being a deliberative body in which Democrats and Republicans have thoughtful and respectful exchange of ideas and develop thoughtful legislation that does take a look at 100 billion or 200 or 2 trillion, as they didn't in this bill. As you said, they cut it from 1,500 pages to a little bit more than 100. But did they cut out the spending? Did people know what is in the 100 billion or the 10 billion that's going to farmers that's viewed as emergency relief? I doubt it.
You know, look,
so can we get back to doing the regular order?
Let's just point out what is obvious. The Congress tries to keep their job by throwing money at their constituents. And so they'll throw money at the automakers, they'll throw money at the Greens, they'll throw money to the farmers. Everyone has their hand out. That's why lobbying in Washington is such a successful and thriving industry. But that said, when we get to the point that we have now reached, where the national debt and the interest payments, as we already showed, the interest payments on the national debt are greater than what we spend a year on defense, our spending, we no longer have the comfort level of being able to afford the amount of waste that the federal government is wasting. And it is just incredible, the amount of waste in there. And hopefully, what Trump is looking to do with Elon Musk and this Doge rather, looking for government efficiency, hopefully that's going to be successful. And by the way, change in policies, change in the border. Trump is going to, one way or the other, seal the border right away. That's a high priority of his. And look at the impact. Talk about spending and deficits. I mean, look at the impact of spending on these cities, these American cities. Chicago, 574, I'm sure that's $575 million taking care of immigrants. And that is costing every citizen of Chicago and Illinois, because, the state is throwing money from its state budget into what needs to be done to keep Chicago afloat. So these things may sound like they're just impacting Washington. They're not. They're impacting all of us across the nation.
And people need to get some perspective. I mean, it's said now that in the last year under Biden, 2.7 million illegal immigrants across the border into the country, and then have been spread into the interior, as this administration has been flying illegal immigrants to a variety of cities, almost establishing new cities of illegal immigrants. 2.7 million, that's the population of Chicago. So we've had the population exactly equal to the population of Chicago cross our borders, and we're dealing with 2.7 illegal immigrants.
Well,
and many of these, certainly not all, but are people who were criminally involved in the country they left, criminally involved now in the country they're here. We've had this publicly displayed, with these hardcore criminal gangs from Venezuela who've established bases in Colorado. And we have the Denver mayor denying it. And then we have film showing what's going on in one of the cities close by or suburbs of Aurora, Colorado, where the gangs are operating. And we've had the same thing going on now in New York. And so luckily we have a somewhat free press left, so we can see with our own eyes what this administration has denied.
Well,
so it's time to get it right.
Let me bring up, because you say the press, and it begs the question. I would say when we look at who are winners and losers as we move forward, obviously the Republicans won the election. But one of the big losers, I think, and we see this as where we are in 2024 going into 2025, are the three major networks, the cable news networks, the old mainstream CBS, ABC, NBC, all of those. They are going away. They've lost their credibility. They've been hiding and covering up for the Biden administration, and the American people no longer turn to these networks. We see the ratings falling apart. We see it in the Washington Post, the New York Times, the LA Times. So that's another thing for people to pay attention to in the coming year.
Right, there's a lot on tap, and I hope what we've done is maybe reorient the public a little bit to looking at the major issues that the new administration will be dealing with, and maybe reminding the new administration they can go over the heads of the legacy media that you refer to. If they don't want to pay attention to that, there are lots of media that do, the new media. And when people say that was one of the major reasons perhaps why Donald Trump won, because his administration paid more attention to the new media than perhaps the legacy media. And certainly for the the gains he made with youth and minorities, that was really gigantic.
Let me interject because we're going to have to close out. But Jeff, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah to our audience. Hope you'll join us again in the new year. And Jeff, for now, we'll say goodbye. Hope it's a good year for everyone.
See you soon.